Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you and welcome to Islam and Life with me, Tariq Ramadan, broadcasting from London. In today's show we ask the question, how can Muslims resist and challenge Britain's atheist movements?
The UK government has granted asylum to an Afghan man who renounced his belief in Islam and denied the existence of God. The Afghan atheist had been a Muslim when he fled conflict in Afghanistan in 2007. He turned to atheism during his time in England. According to the report, the Home Office's decision could set a significant precedent in asylum cases. The UK government has allowed atheists to launch nationwide advertising campaigns aimed at persuading more people to come out as atheists. Initially, buses on 4 London routes had atheistic slogans written on their sides, and soon after, hundreds of buses across the UK were carrying the adverts. This week's Islam and Life asks, how can Muslims resist and challenge Britain's atheist movements?
We are facing a new reality and new challenges, and especially in Western countries what we see is this type of atheist movements that are promoting everywhere, are rejecting and resisting religions. And very often, by the way, they are targeting the Muslims as if the Muslims today are the people who are representing a revivalist movement or coming back to religion. And as much as they are criticizing the Muslims, they now are criticizing all the religions. And what we see today is even governments being involved in this, providing asylum to some of the people who are advocating atheism, and at the same time campaigns that are against religions and promoting atheism as an ideology. We need to get to understand the phenomenon and why is it happening and what could be the answer or the answers coming from Muslims when they have to face this. Challenged by ideologies, challenged by a vision, a concept of life and a concept of death that is completely opposed to the religious principles, to this understanding, and not in a peaceful way, very often in an aggressive and arrogant way. And we have to deal with all these questions. And to answer these questions, I am joined by my guest, Adam Dean, founder and executive director of the Dean Institute. Thank you so much for being with us today. Let me start with the story that we just heard about. When you have the government, and it's so difficult to get Islam in the country, in the UK, and you see that some people coming from Afghanistan, because they are advocating atheism, it's easier for them. Not only it's easier, but we can see governments, and not only the UK government, but other governments around saying it might be the way we can help the Muslims, because within the Muslim communities it's very difficult to get this free thinking. What is your take on that?
I think it's a manifestation of a greater problem. What we have is the phenomena of the new atheism or new atheists, which are pretty much driven by sort of 2 premises. The fact that they consider religion to be against reason, against science, and that it's almost obsolete in an age of reason and evidence. The other premise is that that religion is somehow responsible for all the chaos in the world, that it is evil, and that nothing good comes of religion. Now, Islam is seen as the prime example of those 2 premises to the extent. It is seen as the ultimate immoral religion. It is seen as a religion that's equatable to violence, synonymous with violence. So if you want to see religion at its baddest point, you look at Islam. So the new atheist movement are homing on to Islam and under the guise of attacking all religions. which is very worrying for us, for Muslims, because we're not equipped as a community to respond to those attacks. Often quite witty, rhetorical, and quite demeaning sometimes. And it can come across as being almost bullying. And I've encountered many Muslims via email, in person, that are troubled by this sort of onslaught, if you like.
Yes, before coming to the discussion, because I think that you raised two important factors that we can see on the ground. Would you say, for example, that some of the Western governments, what we heard here, are playing, or setting a precedent in the whole discussion by doing this, or is it legitimate to go in such direction? Because what we got also
with the Western governments, that there is a concern of sort of extreme Islam, and perhaps this would be seen as a tool to, let's say, modernize Muslims, or make them less committed to their faith. This may be used as a tool. And it's not surprising that many Muslims in this same predicament may opt for that option. So I think it can be seen in that way.
It can be seen in that way. At the same time, we as Muslims, we have to be clear that this freedom is there, that we should challenge the new movement by not by condemning and saying that's completely, because this is not going to help. So this is why your points that you just made are very important, where Islam is in fact the symbol of all the evil dimensions of what a religion could be. So how can we challenge this? I have been in discussion with Dawkins and others, and the way they are talking, it's in fact, they are talking to you saying you are dogmatic, but they are doing it in a very dogmatic, rationalist way. So how do we challenge this? And some Muslims are influenced. How do you see the discussion, or the space within which we have to be involved in this discussion?
I think it's helpful to understand the new atheists, because there's a psychology there which is quite important, and we must not equate new atheists with ordinary atheists. New atheists, I would say, are more, let's say, anti-theists, anti-religious individuals. The term is atheist, which is non-theist, let's say, but there's kind of more to that. There's anti-religious, anti-theist individuals that are using sort of clever rhetoric to propagate this kind of vehement attack against religion and Islam. Now, and what we have to understand here is that there is a kind of frustration there. And what is that frustration? The frustration is this: we shouldn't be believing in God now. We should have left religion a long time ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And much to their surprise, we are still religious. There are still people that believe in God and still want to practice their religions. So to understand that frustration is quite important. So therefore, atheism, in a sense, yes, it's growing, but the psychology is much like a wounded animal. That's why it's so aggressive. And that's why we're on the receiving end. Now, it's very important that the way that we take on this challenge is that we don't resort to the same kind of extremism that we're encountering, because that won't be very helpful, be counterproductive. But we need to be acquainted with the arguments. We need to be familiar with those arguments. Unfortunately, Muslims, from what I've understood my experience of talking at universities, they're not very well read. The average non-Muslim, or let's say the average atheist, has done a lot more reading on science and philosophy, and faced with the average Joe Bloggs Muslim from university, they would do much better on these topics of, let's say, existence of God and religion and so forth. So I think it's being proactive. Yes,
that's an important, and we'll come to which type of, or which kind of solutions we may have. Before that, you were saying something which is the perception of Islam as being, the religion that is in fact summarizing all what we can say about other religions. But at the same time, which is clear when you talk to some of the people who are from this very arrogant, aggressive new movement. At the same time, what they see is that they hoped that by coming in the West, the Muslims were going to forget about their religion.
Exactly.
And it's the opposite. The more educated the Muslims are, the more practicing they are becoming. This is exactly the opposite of all what we were expecting from some rationalists or some atheists. So what could be, so this is one of the reasons. At the same time, what is also important is that it's as if the Muslims, in their reaction, they are very often reacting on their own and not enough getting a sense of all the other religious people, Christians and Jews and others who are believers. And it's as if, okay, we take it for or against us and not as a movement to which we have to come with or to respond with all the other traditions.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think from looking at kind of responses, that it's the Muslims are somehow fall into this. Well, it's us against them anyway, and does not the Quran talk about them and us? We are on the right path and they're on the wrong path, and I think that's very, very dangerous, because that's exactly where they want us to be. They want us to be more alienated from society. They want us to move away from working in society and being productive. And I think that's a very good point about we must build friendships with other religions and say, look, we're in the same boat here, and understand that this is not just an attack against Islam, even though Islam is the prime example, but all religions are under attack here. So I think it's a very, very important point that Muslims do have to realize that religious people have to work together, whether you're Christian, whether you're Jewish or Hindu or Sikh, but this is an actual fact that this is an actual attack against all religions. And once they, let's say, hypothetically, were successful in doing away with Islam, let's say, who do you think they're going to go for next? It doesn't stop at Islam. This is an incremental strategy. It just so happens that Muslims and Islam is on the front line there. But I think it's a very good point.
But one thing that I heard, I want to have you take on that. Some of the people, and philosophers, by the way, somebody who was himself an atheist told me, you know what, don't challenge them. You, in fact, give them the publicity they want. So ignore them. And I got exactly the same with some far-right parties where I was challenged and I was responding, say, you are doing exactly what they want. They are aggressive to provoke a reaction, and by your reaction, you do exactly what you want. What is the right strategy?
I would agree. I mean, I engage, for example, Twitter and Facebook. I have rabid atheists, anti-theists on there. You do not respond to them by using arguments, because there are no arguments there. It's just pure hate. So deal with ridicule. Do not take them seriously, because you can only take something seriously if there's something there to be taken seriously with. So, and this is a quite interesting point, because a lot of atheists, sort of serious philosophers, John Gray, for example, Michael Roos, they would consider New Atheism as a bit of a comedy act. Because what's new about New Atheism is not the content, it's not the intellectual content. Most of the arguments are kind of rehashed, recycled arguments from the sort of 19th century. There's nothing really there that's new. It's kind of vintage brew of old logical positivism and empiricism. Nothing there at all. All they have is this kind of sarcasm, cynicism, this kind of rhetoric to sort of mock. And a lot of atheist philosophers, for example, just to quote Michael Roos, he said that when he read The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins' bestseller, he said he felt embarrassed to be an atheist. And that, that's an objective view there. So absolutely right. To respond to them with arguments would fail in that sense.
But at the same time, what you said at the beginning is the problem that we have with some Muslims today, and especially students, is that their knowledge of Islam is sometimes based on repeating what traditionally they got, and repeating things that even if we come to contemporary sciences And even if we come to the way Islam and Muslims and scholars are dealing with some of the scientific discoveries or some of the scientific hypotheses, if you talk among Muslims about evolution, say, oh no, that's completely against our religion. So look, that's not going to make this is not scientific. We have to get a better understanding of the different theories and hypotheses. So there is a lack of scientific equipment, intellectual equipment for the Muslims. So at the same time, we might not have to respond to some of the new movements that are very based on emotion, cynicism, but there are others, and there are people who have
some serious questions.
Exactly.
Some serious questions, absolutely. And my main criticism of the Muslim community is that we live on the periphery of intellectual existence. We are not individuals that are engaged with the sciences and developments in philosophy, for example. And I always ask this question to anyone that has a problem with my sort of criticism. I'd say, how many of our beloved, respected religious individuals, our imams, our scholars, could face up to the top atheistic naturalistic scholars? How many of these scientists could actually, how many of these Muslim scientists, let's say, or Muslim imams or whatever that may be, could take on one of these atheist scientists on the topic of evolution? How many of them? None of them. And so you can imagine young Muslims that are going to university and almost there's a kind of onslaught there. They are facing every type of kind of anti-religious, anti-God, anti-Islam sentiments from the day they walk in to the day they leave. So can you imagine the kind of confidence that young Muslim would have? And the problem here is that our leaders are not equipped. So then how is it going to be the case where we're going to have our youth equipped? I think that it's a problem at the top.
Yes, this is a very important point, because you are talking about the lack of confidence, and if you are not intellectually equipped, this is going to have an impact. And in fact, it has an impact on Muslims. And some of the young Muslims are coming with, they are worried, troubled, and asking questions because they don't feel that the Muslim scholars or the Muslim community is bringing them some clear answers to some of the questions. Add to this another thing that we are witnessing now, which is not coming from within academia, it's coming in our daily life. If you see, for example, after what happened here, a Bass campaign, advocating atheism, what is your take on this? Because this is quite aggressive. We are now having ads, having advertisements, you say, be an atheist.
Don't worry about it. Forget about religion. It's God doesn't exist. It's probably not true. What we have, there's a big irony here. And the irony is what? It's evangelical atheism. It's in-your-face atheism. And this I find quite comical, because
they are making dawah.
Dawah, exactly. They are making dawah. And this is quite ironic. And that's why we can identify that this is on the extremes. They are extremists. These individuals like Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, they are extreme of the atheism world. And that's what we need to understand there. And once we frame them in that area, then we understand that not all atheists will support their views, and not necessarily they have that intellectual ground. What I say to this is that once we understand the new atheist movement and who we're dealing with, and we scrutinize their arguments, what we will find is there's hardly anything there. It's just hot air. Dawkins describes religion as, faith in religion as the belief without evidence. There are volumes and volumes of books. Go to King's College University, go to their library, on the theology section, religious philosophy section, books upon books about the discussion about God's existence. How is this not based on evidence or reason? Were these people deluded? What were they writing? And this is what I mean. To characterize the topic of believing in God, theism, in that respect, that statement itself is ignorant. believing in God is not being ignorant, but that statement to say that believing in God is ignorant, that it's based on lack of evidence, is ignorant in and of itself.
Yes, and I think, once again, by sometimes challenging them and talking to them or arguing with them, you can feel that their knowledge of the whole theological tradition and religions, they don't know about that.
No.
So they are as ignorant in religion as they are claiming the others are in science. And there is something which is here a reality. So when you are equipped, you can respond to this. But now, if you are an average British Muslim, you live in the country, you see your government doing what was done with somebody saying there is no God. You go in the street and you see buses where say, okay, forget about religion. So what could you do? What should be your reaction? What would you advise them to do in this situation?
I think in that situation, if you can imagine the average Muslim, they must feel very insecure about A, being religious, B, obviously believing in God, and C, being Muslim in particular, because on the forefront is Islam. And on top of all the kind of Islamophobia that one is experiencing in day-to-day life, I think it'd be very troubling to be that individual in that capacity. The only way to have that ability to respond to that and sort of find peace within oneself is to be intellectually convinced. We have to, it starts from the very beginning of the education process, the Islamic education. We have to move away from purely teaching our children about previous prophet stories of the previous prophets, rather. It has to be, if you are asked this challenging question, how do you know that God exists? How do you know that God exists when all the evil in the world exists? I'll give you a story. I went to an Islamic school.
Very quickly, yeah.
I went to an Islamic school, and all-girls school, and I was teaching them debating skills. And I said, for an exercise, I said, write me all the things that would support you being a Muslim, and all the reasons why you wouldn't be Muslim. Can you believe it? That the majority of the reasons were on the reasons not to be Muslim. That's the reality. These are young, in an Islamic girls' school, that was the result.
A good example. Thank you so much for that. I think that through our discussion, there is something which is quite important that you said at the beginning. We need to understand what is happening and who are the people and what is the agenda. And at the same time, sometimes we have to respond and sometimes we have to ignore, because this is not really a discussion, it's not a debate, it's very often hatred and rejection. But we have to be equipped, understand that we are not on our own. Many other religious people, Christians, Jews and others could be part of this discussion, and we have to be involved. You said to be equipped and at the same time having an intellectual confidence which is based on education. Well, that's all we have time for. Please let us know your thoughts and views on any of the shows you have seen, and here is the way to contact us.
We at Islam and Life would like to hear your views about the subjects that we discuss. We would also love to hear your suggestions for our program, so get in touch with us. You can share your thoughts with other Islam and Life fans, engage in debate, and find out how to watch our previous shows. Follow us on Twitter at Islam and Life TV, or join us on Facebook by liking our page, Islam and Life on Press TV.
Finally, I would like to thank my guest, Adam Dean. Thank you so much for your presence and your insight, and I hope to see you next week, inshallah.